Oh man, Hades is a fun game. And it looks pretty damn good too. Welcome back to The Breakdown, where we have talented artists take over the channel for the day and show off their creations and share some of their knowledge. In this video, Robin has been kind enough to lift the veil on his texture creation process and share how he used Substance Designer, Houdini, Blender, and zBrush to create this wonderful fan art of a material from the iconic and stylish game, Hades. And if you want to learn even more about stylized and even anime texture creation, check out my 2 courses, where you'll learn from anime material creation to creating beautiful stylized environments. I'll leave a link in the description. Now, let's get into the video.
Hi everyone. In this video, I'm going to show you how did I create this texture using zBrush, Blender, Houdini, and Substance Designer. The main goal of this project was to try new workflows for material creation and practice myself on stylized texture. This is my graph. The main challenges was to get the sculpted look on these rocks and also getting a nice layering effect without any overlapping between shapes. That's why I used Houdini. I would probably get a similar result with Designer, but with a lot of overlapping. And that was an occasion to try Houdini for material creation. Another challenge was to get the same painted effect on the slabs, like here, for example. Those spots. That was pretty fun to use not only Designer for texture creation, and I will show you how did I use zBrush, Blender, Houdini, and Substance. This graph may look intimidating, but I will breaking every part with you. I will begin with the tiling creation here. I'm using 2 identical tile generator. This one for masking and this one for blending with the same seed. And I use these pre-cut slabs to easily get this complex pattern. With this node, I get this as an input and I'm breaking edges. So here's the node. This edge detect allows me to get one corner. And here I subtract to my shape to breaking a bit the tiles. Here it's just few slope blurs with this node as an input that you can find here on Substance Share. For this part, I highly recommend you to check this tutorial from Jimmy. It is really nice. So with the subtract input, I can break my tiles like this, and I can wear a bit more the edges with this noise. It's just a Perlin noise with this mask and a slope blur. A quick tip to get a lot of mask variation with only a pixel processor. You can change your mask by changing the seed. It's a really simple graph, just a float with a random. Here, with a float fill, I'm using this node, gradient float fill, to tilt a bit my tiles. And the distance node allow me to get rid of every black line with the edge detect in mask inputs and the gradient in source. And finally, I'm blending the height map with a mask and with the tilt slabs. Here are the input from Houdini: height map, ID, and curvature. And with this level, I'm getting the full range of my height map. Then with the save transform, I'm tiling the input to get more works like this. I'm doing the same for the ID map and the curvature. This switch allows me to switch between the original input and the tiled one. Again, it's the same for each map. I will show you how it works. It's really simple. Just a switch and you create an input value, which is a boolean, and you assign it here. So with just one input value, you can control all the switch. I'm using this ID map for histogram scan and an edge detect to isolate each works for the float fill. And here with the bbox size, I can mask pebbles by size. And I'm using different grayscale mask for color. Just a quick tip for mask creation: if you have a blend node in max, you can just duplicate and switch to divide with an invert and a histogram scan. And you can mask out this rock, for example. For the sculpting, I mostly use the orb flatten edge brush and the planar rectangle, this one, to get large flat area, to get this line with a curvature map. I try to avoid large detail to hide any obvious repetition in the texture. And I start from this block and cutting down with the slice brush, sorry, like this, and separate each block to get this. Then I try to reduce the poly count to get a smoother simulation inside Houdini. Inside Houdini, I'm importing each rocks and give them a different color. I'm using copy to point with a grid to create a different layer for the simulation. So here, after the simulation, this is the result. And I'm using this node, mesh tiler, to get a tiling result. And finally, I'm making a different map with this node. If you want a more complete tutorial about it, I recommend you to see Simon tutorial. The sand part is really simple for the 8 map. It's just a gradient linear with a bit of tiling. Then I blur it to get a smoother result. Warp a bit to break each lines. Then I use this slope blur to break a bit more. Then blur it. And finally I use this Perlin noise to get more height variation and get a more interesting blending between each element with the sand. So here's the bones part. Concerning the 8 map, most of the work has been done in Blender. I will show you later on. So from this 8 map, I'm using the crop node to isolate each bones, and then a tile sampler with the sand mask a bit blurred and with an histogram scan to reduce the mask area. Here I'm blending in divide mode, the previous 8 map, to get my mask, my bone mask, and use it in the color part. I will show you how did I create this map in Blender. To bake the bones, I'm using this add-on. The bones are just cylinders with a subdivision modifier, and I edit them with the proportional editing to get smooth bones. And I tilt each bones to get a nice blending after with the sand in Designer. This is the 8 preview. I can move each bones like this and just click export to get an update in Designer. It's really quick and it's allow fast iteration like this. And that's all for the Bone 8 creation. In my opinion, the most challenging part was the color creation, because I'm not very used to do stylized texture, and I will show you how did I work with color to obtain this kind of result. Outcome. For me, the most important aspect during the coloring creation were the use of brush strokes with the Easy Splatter or tile sampler. It allows to create nice painted effect. Another good technique is to use a slope blur with a cloud 2 to get an effect of something painted. And another great tip is the use of the light node with a normal map. You can adjust where the light is coming from. For example, on the rock, before and after. I will show you in Marmoset. So it's without, and now with. As you can see, there is a big difference between the both, and that's why the light node is really powerful. And the last and most important point is the more layer of color you have, the better the outcome is. So here, as you can see, there is a lot of blend nodes to get to this result. And each node is important. If I deactivate this one, you will see on the map. It's a lot of subtle detail. One last tip before we dive into the color part of the graph is the importance of having a lot of layer for color, because the more layer of color you have, the better the outcome is. Each layer adds subtle details, and together they are creating a nice and detailed map. As you can see, even the first node are visible in the final outcome. So before creating any node, make sure to identify every color in your reference. For example, here it's not only brown, you can see a bit of blue, a bit of green, and some slabs a bit more reddish. So be sure to get the maximum color from your reference to get a nice color map at the end. So here I'm starting with big details like this. And I use a lot of slope blurs. For example, here with a quantized grayscale to create things like brush strokes just here. And of course, the main color is still brown, but I'm trying to add a bit of variation. Like here, you can guess that I have added a bit of blue, or here a bit of green. So basically, I'm stacking a lot of layer of information from big shape, like here, to medium, and smaller shape at the end. Here, I'm using a directional warp with my random luminance mask to break the color in smaller parts like this. So each rock gets a more unique texture with things like this, a lot of spots everywhere. And I'm adding more and more information. I'm using a lot the easy splatter. It's really nice to splatter anything like brush strokes. It's work well. And don't hesitate to use the hue saturation node to get closer of your reference. So now I'm using the light node to add more information like shading, for example. I'm not using a pure black, but a purple one, because purple go well with yellow and orange. And finally, I'm adding the curvature from my sculpt, just uh, just here. So that's all my rocks, and I'm masking only I'm masking out every rocks that we can see in the texture. I'm breaking a bit the line. And finally, add the black line. And the last details, it's the purple lights that we can find here or here. It's not purple, for example, here, but here. I didn't want it to get every color like green, blue, because it's a bit too flashy, sorry. And I wanted to keep my texture simple. Do not hesitate to saturate and increase the contrast. And I'm blending the rocks with each other color graph that I will show you later. All over my graph, I'm reusing a lot of nodes. For example, I use this one for the sand, but also for the rock. Same process here. I'm using some brush, like this one, from big shape to smaller. I'm adding details, a bit of color variation, as I said before. Here, from big to medium to small, like this. I'm using a lot of this node. It's basically the same as this one. So I can darker or lighter some part here for the sand shading. So same process from large noises to medium one, and finally smaller one. For the tile color part, I'm using this node from the rocks color, just here with a hue saturation variation, breaking with my tiles. Here I'm adding big shapes, smaller one. I'm using a slope blur on all my texture. Here I'm using the high pass grayscale to highlight some edges. Here I try to add some color variation. And here I'm using the light node and the shadow node to get the feeling that sand is all over my slabs because of wind. For example, here the same shading as the rock with the light node. You can control from where the light is coming. Here it's the same line that the rock with the curvature. Here. And I finally blend it with the other color part. I'm using this noise and this noise as a base for the bones color with a blend in min mode, a warp, and I'm sloping with a cloud 2. So here's my base, and I'm adding some brush strokes to add a bit of details. Here I'm increasing the luminance, but I still wanted to keep orange aspect to get well with other color parts of my graph. I'm adding more brush strokes. Again, still a bit of color variation, and I'm shading with a light node. It may looks exaggerated, but it gets softened in the blending section. And I'm adding some small scratches. So here's the last color part, the final blending. So my slabs, the sands with a mask. Here the same with the rock and the rock mask. Here it's for the bones. Here I'm adding a bit more shadows with this node to accentuate the 8th impression. And finally, I'm using an ambient occlusion node as a mask to add a bit more of purple, like here. Et voilà. To conclude, even if it's the color that requires the most work, I recommend you to get a solid 8 map before start to work on your color. Try to not only use Designer if you feel that you can be more efficient with other software. You can use Photoshop even if you don't know how to draw. For example, I draw this. It's an ugly flower, and I'm using in this texture just here. That's okay, I think. Here I'm using a lot of slopes, lights and clouds nodes, but there are plenty of other nodes to experimenting with. I'm sure that you can get interesting noise with a mosaic node, for example. Something like this. I see Designer as the spine of my workflow, and using other software is like adding bones to my spine. Finally, I think the best advice is to get as many layers of color as you can, from big noises to smaller one, and add subtle color variation from your reference. Now let's see how to render this texture with Marmoset Toolbag. I'm gonna show you how did I create my render scene with Marmoset Toolbag. In Edit View, Plugins, Generate Primitives, I add a plane, and I will create a new camera with orthographic mode. Orthographic, like this. In the render section, I change my resolution output to get a square image. A safe frame to get the final results in my viewport. Let's get a better view. Something like this should be good. In this particular case, I create a simple material with only albedo map, and I disabled every other channels except for diffusion, like this. The lighting part is quite simple. I just used two lights, one directional, like this, and an omni light With this one I tried to get a bit of storytelling, like something happening from here. And I added shadows with a mask that I create with Designer. With Designer, I create shadows mask with a Cell4 node. And different scales for each one. Something like that should be good. And merge them with RGBA merge. And now I have a mask in each channels with different tiling. So for the shadows, I duplicate this plane, no, this plane, and with a new material in transparency cutout, I used my previously created shadow and assign it. Now, as you can see, there is crispy shadow, so I will soften them by increasing the diameter like this. And with the different channels, I can get a smaller or bigger tiling. And with the threshold, I can adjust how many cells are showing. Just edit with this option. Increase a bit more the diameter to get very subtle shadows like this. Sorry about my English accent and poor vocabulary. I hope that you still learned a thing or two from this video. And if you have any question, feel free to ask in comments, I will try to answer.